The mist curled low over the valley, thick and silken, wrapping the stones like a secret whispered in the dark. Each tendril clung to the moss, soaking it with damp cold that seeped through the soles of a traveler's boots and whispered against the walls of a castle that had forgotten the warmth of the sun. Perched atop the hillside, the fortress rose in muted defiance, its blackened walls scarred by centuries of wind, fire, and the unrelenting passage of time. It was a sentinel of shadows, watching over the land like a patient, silent witness to the lives that had flourished and perished beneath its gaze. Beneath its battlements, a trapdoor creaked and groaned, an iron-laden hinge protesting the intrusion of air long denied. It revealed a narrow staircase, twisted and steep, leading downward into a cold and suffocating silence. Each step was a negotiation with darkness, the stone beneath worn smooth by countless feet that had passed this way before. The air smelled of damp earth, iron, and the faint, acrid perfume of candle smoke that clung to the walls like a memory that refused to fade. Dripping water echoed in the corridors, a slow, relentless percussion, sounding like muted warning bells that called attention to secrets long buried. This was no place of grandeur. This was a sanctuary of concealment, a hidden archive of human frailty, chests brimming with forbidden letters, clay jars filled with powdered herbs for wounds that could not be spoken of, the whisper of chains that had once held traitors, their metal mouths silenced only by rust. Above, knights patrolled the ramparts, their armor clanking in rhythm with the wind's howl, unaware of the labyrinth that sprawled beneath them. Dust and shadows held the sins of generations, preserved where sunlight could not reach. And yet, within the darkness, life, of a different sort, lingered. The lantern's flame trembled, casting flickering light on etched glyphs carved into stone walls. Each mark told a story, a cipher of battles unseen, of families who vanished into exile, of love forbidden and betrayed. These symbols were testament not only to survival, but to the lives deliberately erased, each stroke a quiet scream, a record of moments the world had chosen to forget. The cold stones seemed to breathe with memory, inhaling grief and exhaling whispers that threatened to rise and suffocate any who dared tread here without respect. A single, rusted key lay in the furthest corner of a chamber. Its presence was unassuming, yet almost defiant, like a promise, as if it waited patiently for a hand brave or foolish enough to claim it. The key had known centuries of silence, guarding the possibility of revelation. Around it, shadows danced and shrank, chasing the lantern's flicker, and in those shadows, one could almost hear the pulse of history itself, cautious and deliberate. Time had a different rhythm here, slow and patient, holding on to moments the outside world had long forgotten. Every drip of water, every hollow gust of wind, every groan of the stone seemed to echo a story of ambition and failure, of whispers that could topple kings, of oaths sworn in darkness. The stairwell descended into a chamber whose very air carried the weight of conscience. Walls pressed close, slick with moisture, inscribed with the names of those who had sought to defy fate, or at least bend it in their favor. There were etchings of battles, crude depictions of knights in contorted agony, their banners caught in invisible storms. A faint smell of salt hinted at hidden wells below, the same water that had sustained life and punished the guilty. And yet, it was not merely history that lingered here, it was intention. Every stone had been laid with purpose, every corridor carved to obscure the truth, every hidden alcove holding the ghosts of choices never forgiven. Footsteps were unnecessary. The chamber spoke itself. The air vibrated with accusation, regret, and desire, an unbroken thread weaving past and present. One could almost imagine the figures who had once moved through this subterranean maze. A young scribe clutching forbidden letters to his chest, heart hammering in fear that discovery would mean death. A lover crouched in shadow, hands trembling over a secret, desperate for a touch that might never be returned. A knight dragging a bound man through these halls, chains clanging, conscience screaming in silence. Each life left a mark, not only upon the stone, but upon the pulse of the place itself. In these corridors, the past had weight, and it pressed down with expectation, demanding acknowledgement from any who entered. Above, the castle seemed impervious, its towers and ramparts bathed in mist, unaware of the truths they shielded. Yet below, the underground held its breath, keeping watch over knowledge that could undo the proudest monarch or cast a dynasty into shadow. The lantern trembled again, its feeble glow revealing more glyphs. Small victories etched beside great tragedies, whispered confessions carved into niches that seemed to swallow the light. The walls were alive with testimony, and for those who listened, the silence was almost deafening. One could hear the faint scrape of a dagger being sheathed, the subtle hiss of breath in a forgotten chamber, and the slow, deliberate drip of water falling from unseen heights. There was a rhythm to the silence, an unspoken law that governed the subterranean world. It demanded patience, reverence, and courage. Here, one learned that power was not always wielded in daylight. It thrived in shadow, in the careful preservation of secrets, in the quiet knowing that some truths were too dangerous to be spoken aloud. The key, resting in its corner, seemed to embody this principle. Unassuming, yet potent, a gatekeeper of revelations that could alter fates if turned. The corridors, though dark and suffocating, invited discovery, if one dared step beyond fear, beyond obedience, beyond the impulse to flee. And as the wind rattled the shutters above, the underground held its vigil. Dust motes floated in the lantern's glow like specters, caught between what was known and what was hidden. Every carved glyph, every jar of powder, every chain and rusted hinge spoke of lives entangled in decisions that would echo far beyond the cold stone. Even the faintest hint of salt in the air carried a story, of tears shed, blood spilt, and water that sustained yet imprisoned. The castle above seemed almost indifferent, a monument to surface power, while beneath, a world pulsed with the truths the daylight would never see. In the quietest corner, the rusted key waited, a small, almost imperceptible promise that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, had a chance to awaken. The lantern flickered one last time, sending shadows twisting along the walls like ghosts preparing to speak. The silence of the underground was not emptiness, it was anticipation. Every stone, every glyph, every echo held its breath, waiting for the hand that would disturb the sacred hush and set history trembling once more. A storm tore across the high moors, a wild, relentless symphony of wind and rain that pounded the castle roof as though the heavens themselves sought to batter its ancient stones. Lightning flickered, revealing the jagged silhouette of the keep, black against a sky swollen with anger. Inside, the castle trembled with the echoes of the tempest. Servants, faces pale and hair plastered to their heads, scurried through corridors lined with faded tapestries, their footsteps striking the flagstones like the anxious heartbeat of the fortress itself. The air was thick with damp and smoke from the hearths struggling against the fury of the storm. Every door and archway seemed to sigh beneath the assault of the elements, the old wood groaning with a voice older than the men who walked these halls. Beneath this storm-riven upper world, in the dungeons, silence reigned in measured, dripping beats. A narrow passageway twisted downward, the stones slick with moss and the faint slime of forgotten water. The torchlight flickered against the walls of the arched chamber, casting shadows that danced and recoiled, as if the stones themselves were breathing. The scent of mildew mingled with the copper tang of old blood and the lingering sweetness of spilled wine, a perfume of secrets long abandoned. Here, in these cold, dark veins of the castle, nobles once hid letters that spoke of betrayal, of plots hatched in whispers. Priests had buried relics of forbidden faiths, their power too dangerous to gaze upon openly. Every corner spoke of devotion and terror alike. A cross carved hastily into the wall by trembling hands, a scrap of silk caught in a crevice, a trace of a meager meal left as a silent offering. The chains hanging from the ceiling were worn smooth by the struggle of countless captives, their iron singing faintly under the sway of the torchlight. A trapdoor, partially concealed beneath a faded rug, promised further secrets, a descent into darkness deeper than the walls themselves. Shadows clung to the edges of the chamber, as though reluctant to leave the embrace of the stone. Each step of the intruder or the cautious servant seemed to awaken memories embedded in the walls. The past seeped from a mortar, whispers of confessions, the echo of sobs muffled against stone, the restless stirrings of those who had come before. Outside, the storm screamed across the battlements, tearing at banners and rattling the doors. But down below, the dungeons held a hushed patience. Water dripped from unseen crevices, its soft plink a metronome counting the slow passage of centuries. In the gloom, the flicker of torchlight caught on something nearly forgotten, the faint etching of a dagger in stone, a mark of rebellion, a promise of revenge. Somewhere beyond the chamber, a door groaned, moved by the wind or perhaps by a hand long dead, as if the castle itself were breathing in the storm, inhaling the terror above and exhaling it into the quiet of its underground heart. In the arched chamber, the air was heavy with the tension of secrets held too long. Each stone seemed to vibrate with the memory of prayers uttered in fear, of vows broken in silence. The walls themselves appeared almost sentient, their damp surfaces shimmering with the torch's reflection. Moss crept along the cracks, a green lacework tracing the outlines of years of suffering and devotion. Here, history was not written in parchment or ink, but in the very walls, etched in sweat, blood, and whispered words. A shadow shifted at the edge of the torchlight, subtle and alive, tracing the footsteps of those long departed. The ghost of a servant, a priest, a noble, none could say. Perhaps it was memory made flesh, walking once more through the narrow corridors of human fear. Every object in the chamber held a story. The swing of the chains, the curl of a discarded ribbon, the uneven scratch of a prayer in the stone. The air was thick with the weight of what had been hidden here, with the quiet echo of loyalty betrayed, of faith defiled, of sins too dangerous for daylight. Above, the storm raged still, but below, the castle held itself in watchful patience. It was a vessel of memory, a guardian of the deeds that dared not see the sun. The wind's fury could not touch this darkness, nor the thunder shake its resolve. Only the dripping of water, steady and patient, marked the passage of time. And in that quiet rhythm, the past spoke in its own tongue, the language of fear, of hope, of faith, of despair. The candle's flame trembled as it fought the draft from the narrow slit of a window high above. Its light caught on a carved relief, a hand reaching upwards, fingers strained in prayer or supplication. Somewhere deep in the stone, a rat scurried, a living echo of the endless motion of the castle. And the chamber seemed almost to breathe with them, walls expanding and contracting as if alive, holding the stories of those who had loved, feared, and perished within these confines. Outside, a bolt of lightning cleaved the sky, illuminating the moors in stark, white brilliance. The storm's voice roared across the land, but in the dungeons, there was only the muted rhythm of dripping water, the sigh of stones, and the quiet murmur of shadows. Every surface, every corner, every chain and crevice held a fragment of life, once vibrant, now silent yet ever present. The castle, in all its ancient weight, was a guardian, not merely of stone, but of memory itself, a dark archive of human folly and devotion. preserved against the relentless march of the storm above. And as the storm began its slow retreat, leaving the moors in a misty hush, the chamber exhaled, settling into a tentative silence. The chains hung still, the moss glistened in the faint torchlight, and the carved cross stood solemn, unyielding. Somewhere, beneath the trapdoor, secrets waited, patient and eternal, ready to reveal themselves only to those who dared descend. And in that quiet, the castle whispered, "The past is never gone. It merely waits, shadowed and silent, for the next step, the next hand, the next heart to tread its ancient stones." Frost glazed the castle parapets, each jagged stone catching the first weak light of dawn like the edge of a blade. The wind whispered through battlements, carrying a chill that seemed to cut deeper than the mere winter air. Below, the village lay in silence, shuttered homes casting long shadows across frozen streets. Smoke rose in lazy spirals from chimneys, curling as if in reluctance, a mournful sigh from hearths long forgotten by the waking world. The morning felt suspended, as though the land itself waited with bated breath for some unseen judgment. Beneath the keep, hidden from the sun's indifferent gaze, a hatch yawned into darkness. It led to a narrow stairwell, hewn directly from the living rock, each step worn smooth by centuries of unrecorded passage. The air inside was thick, scented with damp stone, old wood, and the faint, acrid tang of extinguished candles. Here, history did not whisper. It pressed upon the skin, heavy and tangible. Stacks of parchment bound with cracked wax, rusted weapons dulled by time, and pots of dried herbs sat like relics of a world that had forgotten them, each object a testament to labor, devotion, and the quiet terror of necessity. Iron rings protruded from the walls, darkened with rust, reminders of prisoners once tethered to these chambers, their moans long since absorbed by stone. Footsteps above, muffled and unaware, echoed the life of the world outside, ignorant of the subterranean arteries that pulsed silently beneath their feet. The corridors twisted like a river forced underground, each bend revealing niches carved with obsessive care. Latin inscriptions traced along the stone spoke in delicate script to eyes that would never meet the day, messages of confession, warning, devotion, and despair. A draft wound through these tunnels, carrying with it a whisper of the cold above, and it stirred the musty perfume of hidden coffers. One chamber held a bell, its clapper broken, silence its sole companion. In another, a veil draped a stone seat, a shroud of memory hanging like mist over ceremonies long dissolved. Every shadowed corner seemed to breathe. Every surface resonated with a faint echo of a heartbeat, the residue of lives confined to secrecy. Even in darkness, the castle's underground chambers throbbed with stories of fear, of courage, of acts too dangerous to greet the sunlight. The deeper one descended, the more the world above dissolved into abstraction. Here, life and death were woven tightly, indistinguishable in their persistence. The smell of iron, of decaying wood, and the subtle aroma of herbs used to ward off disease clung to the senses. Rusted weapons, once held by trembling hands or fists clenched in defiance, lay inert now, yet their presence suggested the quiet terror that had shaped every stone, every arch, every turn of this labyrinth. A scribe's corner appeared unexpectedly in the gloom. A desk carved into the wall, a quill long dried, and ink bottles dark with age. Faint scratches on parchment revealed thoughts of devotion, betrayal, and questions too dangerous to speak aloud. Here, one could almost hear the whispered prayers of men and women who had clawed meaning from a world that offered none. Each inscription was a tiny rebellion, a record of life asserted in the shadow of omnipresent authority. The corridors narrowed, and the stone walls seemed to lean inward, as if the castle itself pressed closer, bearing witness. The faintest glint of morning light reached in from above, falling on a small altar where offerings had long ceased. Dust covered the remnants of ritual, a broken chalice, a candle stub, a piece of tattered cloth. Time had turned these sacred objects into artifacts of memory, yet they hummed with the invisible energy of past devotion. The veil of neglect was thin here. The air itself seemed alive with echoes, murmurs of vows made in trembling hands, promises whispered in fear. A single candle flickered where the corridor widened into a chamber of forgotten authority. Its flame danced across a tapestry, worn and frayed, depicting the king and his court in a tableau of judgment and indulgence. The contrast between the power above and the squalor below was stark. Opulence and terror were separated by but a single floor of stone, and yet both were bound by the same law of survival, the same fragile thread of human will. In the silence, the candlelight revealed traces of a handprint pressed into dust, an imprint of someone who had been here, someone who had dared to witness what others could not endure. The passages wound on, revealing more relics of a world half-remembered. A pile of scrolls, fragile and crumbling. A small chest, its lock long since rusted. A stool scarred with carvings of hearts, crosses, and the occasional clawed scratch of frustration or despair. The air grew cooler still, each breath visible, mingling with the faint mustiness and whisper of stone settling. Here, the weight of centuries pressed down, tangible and relentless, each step echoing 1,000 lives lived in muted terror and quiet hope. A faint sound disturbed the stillness, a scuttling perhaps, or a droplet of water tracing its way down the wall. But the darkness held, swallowing the noise and leaving only the feeling of anticipation. One could almost sense the eyes of the past observing, measuring, judging. The chambers were not empty. They were populated by memory, by the intangible residue of those who had walked these stones, who had stared at the same walls, and who had been tethered to the same iron rings. A final corridor revealed a small alcove, where a bell, cracked and silent, rested atop a slab of stone. Its presence was a testament to vanished ceremonies, to rituals erased by time, but never truly forgotten. Light from the hatch above crept down, weak and hesitant, touching the cold surface with a hint of revelation. It was here, in this liminal space between shadow and dawn, between history and the present, that the story of the castle's hidden life was most tangible. Every stone, every whispering draft, every shadowed corner, spoke of courage tethered to fear, of survival bound to secrecy, of humanity clinging desperately to its own fragile record. As the first light of day strengthened, the hatch above seemed to beckon, promising return to a world of warmth, of smoke, of living voices. Yet the catacombs held their own authority, silent, enduring, pulsing with the invisible heartbeat of centuries. Those who descended here did not merely explore. They listened, they bore witness, they became part of the subterranean memory of lives long past. And as one finally emerged, leaving the cold stone and whispered secrets behind, the castle itself seemed to exhale, releasing the weight of history, while guarding its heart, still beating in shadow, waiting for the next to dare. The castle sat like a blackened tooth in the highland mist, jagged against the gray sky, its silhouette slicing the horizon with menace and memory. Rain slid from the eaves in cold rivulets, splashing onto flagstones slick with age and neglect. Every drop seemed to echo with the ghosts of centuries, carrying whispers of those who had passed through these halls, some seeking glory, others hiding in terror. Above, the wind tore at the battlements, shrieking through the gaps like a chorus of lamenting souls, and the timbers groaned beneath the weight of countless winters, each one burying secrets a little deeper into stone. Below, A spiral staircase wound into the bowels of the fortress, descending into darkness that smelled of wet stone and iron. A single torch, its flame quivering, threw long shadows across niches cut into the walls, and in those niches rested objects that bore the weight of human ambition and despair. Knives, dulled by centuries of use, glinted faintly, as though still thirsting for the blood they had known. Rings, ornate and faded, bore names almost lost to memory, whispered on the lips of generations long turned to dust. Letters written in cipher, their paper brittle and curling, spoke of plots hatched in candlelight, of vows sworn and broken, of the delicate dance between loyalty and treachery. A priest's prayer book, stained by water and gnawed by moths, lay atop a rough-hewn altar. Its pages bore the faded ink of clandestine rites, the careful looping script of hands trembling with devotion and fear. The altar seemed to hold its breath beneath the torchlight, a quiet sentinel over secrets that could not speak themselves aloud. The air was thick with a kind of reverent unease, as though even a whisper might summon the wrong spirits from the past. Every scuff of foot against stone, every drip from the damp ceiling, resonated with a weight of expectancy, reminding the living that they were merely passing through, fragile intruders in a place that had already seen empires rise and crumble. Shadows gathered in the corners like slow-moving water, pooling and shifting with the flame, giving form to imagined specters, guardians of forbidden knowledge. One could almost believe that if one stared long enough, the stone itself might open a mouth and recount the stories it had witnessed. The knights who had plotted rebellion under the cloak of night, drawing swords that would never return. The women who had hidden relics of faith beneath loose floorboards, hearts pounding in prayerful silence as the castle slept. The children secreted away in cramped recesses, silent witnesses to a world of greed and power that had no mercy for innocence. Each object seemed to vibrate with the lives it had touched, a quiet resonance that filled the chamber in a pulse of shared history. Candles flickered along the walls, their smoke twisting and curling as if alive, painting the stone in shifting shades of gray and gold. The flame danced like a captive spirit, shrinking back from the damp air that sought to smother it. And in that dance, one could almost see the faces of those who had come before. Faces of hope and desperation intertwined, of whispered promises and cries muffled by the thick walls. It was here, beneath the fortress, that the raw essence of human ambition lingered most vividly. The hunger for survival, the peril of devotion, the perilous thrill of knowing too much. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with memory. Each stone held the imprint of hands long vanished, of swords struck and shields battered, of laughter and curses alike. It was a chronicle written not in words, but in the weathering of the battlements, in the dark stains that ran down the corridors like rivers of history. Footfalls in the hallways could summon echoes of the past, carrying the resonance of strategy meetings, secret councils, and whispered betrayals. Time, it seemed, was a pliable thing here. A knight's ambition might linger decades after his bones crumbled. A lover's plea for mercy might still tremble in the air above a tomb. In the spiral staircase, the air thickened, tasting of wet stone and smoke. The torchlight trembled over a half-hidden door, revealing a room whose floor sagged under the weight of forgotten treasure and forbidden knowledge. Here, relics of perilous intrigue rested quietly, daring no one to touch them. A dagger, its hilt worn smooth by countless grips, seemed poised mid-strike, frozen between action and history. A ring, encrusted with dull gems, still seemed to claim dominion over the hand it had once adorned. And letters, brittle and curled, whispered of messages hidden from kings and pawns alike, of alliances crafted and shattered beneath the flickering glow of secrecy. Above, the storm pressed against the ramparts, but below, the world felt suspended in an eternal hush. It was a pause that carried tension, the kind of waiting that makes one's own heartbeat seem loud in the chest. One could almost hear the faint echo of laughter turn to panic, the quiet scraping of shoes across stone floors, the rustle of robes as a priest or a scribe navigated the labyrinthine halls. Here, history was not a static tableau. It was alive, as if the walls themselves remembered each footstep, each gasp, each whisper that had ever dared disturb the silence. And yet, there was beauty in the gloom. The way the torchlight kissed the arches, the scent of rain and wax mingling in the air, the sound of water dripping from a ceiling carved centuries ago, all of it lent a solemn poetry to the chamber. One could almost feel the pulse of lives intertwined with this fortress, hearts beating in tandem with the stones, a rhythm of fear, loyalty, and hope. Even betrayal, heavy and dark as it had been, seemed almost necessary, a reminder that passion and survival are often inseparable. The castle, perched high in its mist-shrouded highlands, breathed in the storm above and exhaled through its crypts below. It held its secrets tightly, yet generously offered glimpses to those who dared venture into its shadowed halls. Every object, every creaking stair, every flickering candle was a testament to the fragility and audacity of human life. And in that suspended space between stone and shadow, between past and present, the living felt the weight of all who had come before. Their victories, their failures, their undying hopes threaded into the very air. As the torch guttered one final time, sending a thin column of smoke toward the ceiling, the crypt seemed to exhale a long, sibilant sigh. It was a reminder that time moves differently here. The storm above would pass, empires would rise and fall, and the rain would cease, but the secrets beneath the castle's skin would endure. And for those who listened closely, it was possible to hear not just the silence, but the pulse of eternity itself, coaxing the next chapter of life and death, loyalty and betrayal, into being. The highlands held their breath, the castle its dark vigil, and the stories of all who had dared walk this line between survival and discovery lingered, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to uncover them. Twilight fell over the jagged cliffs, and the sea wind tore through the battlements like a living thing, carrying salt and brine, a scent of both life and decay. The castle, perched like a sentinel against the roiling horizon, had been abandoned by kings and soldiers alike, yet it remained watchful. Its stones, darkened by centuries of storm and neglect, seemed to pulse with memory, a heartbeat muffled beneath layers of moss and fog. Gulls wheeled in the bruised sky above, their cries slicing through the cold air, as though mocking the silence of the stones beneath. Beneath the main hall, a hidden hatch yawned like a mouth unwilling to speak. Its hinges groaned under the weight of years, giving way to a descent carved from solid rock. The walls, slick with damp and a sheen of unyielding moss, closed around the visitor, swallowing sound and light. Every step echoed like a whispered confession, bouncing off surfaces that had long absorbed the secrets of men and women who had come seeking power or hiding from it. The corridor twisted and narrowed, drawing one deeper into the underworld of the castle, where history lingered like a shadow reluctant to leave. Chests of coins sat in corners, their lids warped, their contents still gleaming faintly, a reminder that treachery had once been financed here, that gold had whispered promises of betrayal in this very darkness. Clay jars, cracked with age, held herbs, some to heal, others to harm, leaving behind only the faint scent of forgotten remedies and curses. Iron rings, set into stone like stubborn relics, bore witness to suffering long silenced. Prisoners chained and left to murmur to the shadows, to beg forgiveness from walls that would not answer. Dripping water fell from the ceiling at irregular intervals, each drop a metronome marking the passage of lives long ended. The faint rustle of cloth and leather seemed almost human in its insistence, as if the walls themselves remembered the careful, furtive movements of those who had inhabited these passages. In a corner, a rusted bell sat untouched. Its clapper had long since fallen silent, but its presence was an accusation, a reminder that sound could vanish while guilt remained. Every niche held relics of quiet desperation. A veil, torn and frayed, lay against the stone, a testimony to vows broken in fear and in secrecy. A prayer book, its pages worn smooth from tears, seemed to breathe in the air of the chamber, offering comfort that had once been sought in whispered pleas. A knife, dulled from clandestine use, caught what little light there was, a glimmer of danger and protection intertwined. The smell of earth and iron mingled with candle soot, curling into the lungs of any who dared enter, wrapping the living in a shroud of the dead. Shadows flickered across the walls, restless as if alive, and one could almost imagine them moving with purpose, carrying the weight of unspoken stories. The castle above maintained its vigilant stance, daring the storm to batter its walls. But below, in the labyrinthine depths, life had survived in silence, in secrecy. Here, men and women had plotted, prayed, and suffered. Here, truths too dangerous for the daylight had been stored, tucked beneath the skin of the earth, waiting for the moment when courage or folly might breathe them back into the world. Every stone was heavy with a story that could unravel empires, that could topple kings, that could ignite rebellion or despair. A solitary torch, its flame guttering, cast long, trembling shadows that stretched across the rough-hewn walls. Each flicker revealed the careful marks of those who had carved out these secret spaces, notches scratched to measure time, initials carved to mark ownership or memory, symbols meant to ward off or summon unseen forces. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the very stones had been waiting for centuries for the right eyes, the right hands, to witness what had been preserved in silence. A sudden gust rattled the hatch above, carrying with it the echo of a storm not yet broken. It mingled with the dripping water, creating a rhythm both menacing and mournful. One could almost hear the ghostly voices of those who had traversed these corridors before, traitors, conspirators, exiles, and spies, each leaving a trace in the very air, a whisper that might vanish or persist, depending on the listener's attention. The castle was not merely stone. It was memory made tangible, sorrow rendered physical, a testament to the fragility of power and the resilience of secrecy. In the smallest recess, barely visible, a bundle of letters lay rotting, their ink blurred by damp, but their words no less potent. They spoke of love forbidden, of plans hatched in fear, of betrayals that had changed the course of history. The hands that wrote them had long returned to dust, yet their intentions lingered, suspended in the cold, heavy air. A candle stub, its wax pooled and hardened, hinted at nights spent reading in the half-light, when hope and dread walked hand in hand. The deeper one ventured, the more the senses became acute. The taste of iron on the tongue, the chill crawling along the spine, the sensation of wet stone under fingertips. Every sound, a distant drip, a scuff of unseen feet, the sigh of the wind through a fissure, became amplified, a chorus of the past singing to those who dared to listen. One could almost feel the pulse of the castle itself, slow and deliberate, as if it were breathing through the centuries, keeping time with every clandestine heartbeat that had ever dared beat beneath its floors. And yet, amid the gloom, there were signs of life, of determination. A broken stool hinted at hurried planning. A smashed bottle whispered of fear or celebration, and a faint trace of blood, darkened by age, reminded any visitor that human desperation had once walked these halls as surely as any shadow. The castle was both grave and cradle, a place where history was written in silence, in sweat, in fear, and in fleeting moments of courage. As night deepened, the wind outside rose, rattling shutters and whistling through gaps in the stone. But below, the secret chambers remained a sanctuary for the hidden, a repository for the unseen and the dangerous. Here, beneath the castle's vigilant gaze, every object, every mark, every whisper was a story waiting to reclaim its voice. Every stone was heavy with expectation, ready to divulge what had been buried too long. And in that stillness, in the convergence of shadow, stone, and memory, one could sense the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation. A single misstep, a careless glance, a moment of curiosity, and the silence might fracture, spilling the weight of history into the light. For the castle, though abandoned in the eyes of the world, was alive in the ways that truly mattered, alive in its stories, alive in the truths it had protected, alive in the trembling hearts of those who would one day dare to enter. Above, the storm raged, waves smashing against the cliffs, but below, the hidden chambers held their vigil. They were guardians of forgotten truths, witnesses to desperation and loyalty, to betrayal and hope. And as one ascended back toward the hall, leaving the shadows and secrets behind, the weight of what had been witnessed lingered, a reminder that even the smallest, quietest corners of the world might shape empires and echo across centuries, if only someone was brave enough to listen. The castle, in all its desolate grandeur, waited for that listener, for that moment when the whispers would become a voice. And in the faint glow of the dying torch, with the echo of dripping water fading into silence, one could almost hear it. The world held its breath, and the stories of the hidden were poised, ready to awaken. A pale moonlight spilled across the battlements, casting the castle in silver and shadow, each turret a sentinel watching the land in frozen silence. The wind clawed at the stones, its voice a sorrowful hymn through empty towers and deserted halls. Within, the great hall lay abandoned, its hearth cold, the long tables bare, and tapestries hanging like silent witnesses to centuries of loyalty, treachery, and despair. Each thread seemed to hum with memory, the images of knights and ladies now ghosted, their faces blurred by time, yet still bearing the weight of the oaths they had sworn. A hush lingered, heavy and tangible, as if the walls themselves held their breath, guarding secrets better left untouched. Beneath the polished stones, the air changed. A narrow stair descended, slick with damp, the scent of earth and iron rising to meet any who dared step down. Here, in the labyrinthine cellars, the castle's hidden life unfolded, far from the eyes of kings, priests, and the courtiers who believed themselves masters of its fate. Shadows pooled in corners, thick and permanent, crawling along the walls like slow-moving tides. The light of a single torch caught on iron-bound chests, their lids scratched and dented, each seal a promise of revelations that could shatter crowns or call forth vengeance. Beside them, jars of powders lined the shelves, some for healing, some for death, their contents whispered over with caution and prayer. Chains hung like grim art from the stone walls, cold, silent, a reminder of human suffering folded into the foundation itself. Carvings scarred the walls, names etched in Latin, prayers murmured and abandoned to stone, symbols drawn to protect truths too dangerous to be known. One could almost hear the trembling voices of the scribes or prisoners, whispering into emptiness, leaving behind echoes that time could not swallow. Each scratch of quill, each desperate plea, was now a voice trapped between history and memory. The cold air carried a quiet weight. It pressed on shoulders, settled into bones, and demanded acknowledgement of the lives that had passed here. Every object had a story, a cracked bell that had rung in triumph and mourning alike, a cloth stained with grief, perhaps blood, perhaps tears, a small iron key, patiently waiting for hands long gone, the secret it unlocked fading with every generation. The silence was punctuated only by the soft shift of stone beneath the wind's insistent sigh. Outside, the battlements screamed with it, a lament over forests and fields, over villages long abandoned, over battles fought and forgotten. Below, in the underworld of the castle, time moved differently. It slowed, thickened, as though the very stones absorbed each heartbeat, each whispered oath, preserving the weight of danger, devotion, and exile in a place untouched by the noise of the surface world. The mind might wander here and quickly be lost. The cellars seemed to stretch beyond the reach of eyes, their corridors folding inward like a maze designed to trap memory itself. A solitary torch flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the damp walls. A prisoner might have crouched here, trembling against the cold stone, the taste of iron thick on their tongue, the knowledge that betrayal was only a breath away. Somewhere, a faint scurrying hinted at vermin, or perhaps something more spectral, those who had lingered too long between life and legend. Every item was a witness: a pot of black powder, a vial once mistaken for medicine, the rope scars etched into timber, each mark a narrative of survival or sacrifice. The air was heavy with choices made in silence, promises forged in fear, and confessions swallowed by stone. In the farthest corner, a chest held documents whose words could undo the mighty, letters bearing the ink of ambition, desperation, and despair. A scribe's hand had labored over them, balancing truth against survival, hope against ruin. The chains, now empty, clanged softly in the occasional draft, a rhythm echoing the passage of unseen lives. Shadows moved with a life of their own, each flicker a suggestion of presence, as if the past itself were wandering these halls, reluctant to be forgotten. The cellar breathed, slowly, a rhythm distinct from the castle above. The stones exhaled, carrying the essence of centuries of devotion and defiance, of whispers exchanged in fear and love alike. A bell, once bright and sonorous, now hung cracked and muted, yet its presence was felt in the silence, a reminder that sound and memory are sometimes one. A torn banner lay folded in the corner, its colors dimmed but defiant, bearing witness to oaths that had endured long after the hands that swore them had turned to dust. Each surface, each shadowed nook, spoke of the fragile line between order and chaos, faith and betrayal, life and death. In the deepest reaches, the air thickened, redolent of decay and quiet menace. Torchlight danced over jars, parchments, and skeletal remains of what had been vital, alive, and defiant. Names scratched into stone bore witness to prayer and desperation, secrets and sins preserved in a silence that could never forgive or forget. A faint draft carried scents of earth and rot upward, whispering through the narrow stairway to the halls above, connecting this hidden world to the one bathed in moonlight, where life seemed easier, safer, but blind to the truths below. Here, nothing could hide from the weight of history, and yet no one could see it, an invisible kingdom beneath the kingdom, a world where morality, survival, and power were distilled into their rawest forms. A single torch guttered and died, leaving one corner in darkness, so complete it seemed to swallow the stone itself. In that instant, the cellar was a tomb and a sanctuary, a place of reckoning and refuge, where the ghosts of choices lingered, neither condemning nor forgiving, merely existing in the stillness. One could almost imagine the walls listening, recording every whisper, every footfall, every prayer muttered in desperation, preserving them like insects in amber. Outside, the wind continued its mournful lament, but below, only silence spoke, profound and unbroken, carrying the weight of lives folded into the shadowed masonry. And in that quiet, one might glimpse the truth of the castle itself. Not merely a fortress of stone, but a vessel of memory, a keeper of secrets, a monument to the delicate, perilous balance between light and darkness. Each stone was alive with the weight of human devotion and fear, each shadow a story half told, each object a testament to survival against forces both seen and unseen. To descend here was to confront history not as fact, but as lived experience. Hunger, loyalty, betrayal, devotion, and despair all pressed into the cold embrace of the earth. Here, in the underworld beneath moonlit battlements, the castle breathed with the accumulated lives of the forgotten, a reminder that beneath every surface lies a depth of story waiting to be uncovered. And as the first glimmers of dawn would someday touch the towers above, the cellars remained untouched, eternal, waiting for footsteps that might never come, for hands that could no longer turn keys, for voices that might never again whisper secrets aloud. The castle above would awaken to light and sound, but below, the weight of memory remained, patient and unyielding. The surface might move with the world, with politics, with power, but here in this silent underworld, the past held its own kingdom, and it was sovereign. The castle rose like a shadowed monument from the fog-laden valley, its towers piercing the morning mist like blackened teeth. Dew clung to its ancient stones, turning them slick and unyielding, a silent warning to any who approached unbidden. Above, banners hung limp in the still air, their colors dulled by sun and time, yet they whispered a history of fealty and conquest, of oaths taken and broken, as if the fabric itself remembered every promise sworn within these walls. The wind carried a chill that seemed to seep not only into bone but into the very soul, a cold whisper reminding all who lingered that this place belonged to shadows as much as to men. Inside, life moved in quiet, measured steps. Servants crossed stone halls with the careful discipline of those accustomed to being unseen, their footsteps swallowed by the weight of centuries. The castle seemed to breathe slowly, each exhalation a memory, each inhalation a warning. Torches flickered dimly along the corridors, though most were long extinguished, leaving shadows to dance freely across walls worn by time. The scent of wet stone mingled with the faint tang of smoke, and sometimes, deep in the bowels of the fortress, a hint of iron would hang in the air, as though blood had never fully departed these floors. Beneath the grandeur of the throne rooms and chapels, a hidden door waited, a seam in the stone almost invisible to the casual eye. It led to passages narrow and labyrinthine, carved over generations by hands that toiled in secrecy, shaping stone to conceal what the world above must never know. Here, in the bowels of the castle, history was not written in proclamations or victories, but in silence, in the careful preservation of acts both pious and profane. The corridors were thick with the aroma of dampness and earth, of herbs stored for rituals long since abandoned, and of parchment yellowed with age, brittle yet stubbornly resisting decay. On the shelves, jars of dried roots and powders huddled together like forgotten witnesses. Scrolls, bound in leather cracked and softened by the passage of time, carried the weight of prayers, curses, and accounts that would never meet the light of day. Rusted chains hung from hooks and walls, their purpose long obscured, but their presence spoke of confinement and devotion alike. Every detail was deliberate, a record of human hearts, a testament of lives lived quietly in the shadow of history. In a corner, a carving in Latin pleaded for mercy. Miserere nobis, it read, etched with trembling hands that had once sought forgiveness. Nearby, a veil draped over a wooden post suggested mourning, the faint imprint of tears still imagined in the fibers. A broken bell lay on the floor, hollow and mute, yet in the silence it echoed the sins and sorrows of generations, a reminder that even absence could speak volumes. The passages twisted and turned with deceptive ease, leading deeper into darkness where even the bravest torchlight faltered. A faint draft drifted through the tunnels, carrying the taste of cold earth and the heavy weight of memory. It spoke of lives intertwined with devotion and deceit, of lovers kept apart by walls and stone, of crimes that would never see judgment in the world above. And yet, there was a rhythm to this hidden life, a pulse that neither time nor decay could fully extinguish. The stones themselves seemed to hum faintly, resonating with the accumulated hopes, fears, and secrets of those who had walked these corridors centuries before. In one small alcove, a shelf bore the careful arrangement of items that seemed innocuous to the untrained eye. A quill and ink pot, a broken dagger, a tiny vial of amber liquid, possibly tincture, possibly poison. Each object bore the weight of intention, of a story hidden from the gaze of lords and kings. A single candle, long burned down, left streaks of wax like veins upon the stone, marking the hours of vigil kept by a solitary soul. The air was thick, almost viscous with the sense of unseen eyes, and the quiet was so complete that the slightest sound, a shifting foot, a whisper, seemed to echo as though the castle itself were listening. It was in these hidden halls that human emotion found its most unguarded expression. Faith was preserved not in grand cathedrals, but in whispered prayers scratched into walls, in the careful tending of an herb garden hidden from inquisitive eyes. Crimes were concealed not in public courtrooms, but in the careful disposal of objects, in the silent closing of doors that would never open again. Love, forbidden and secret, lingered in the folds of drapery, in faint traces of perfume, in the memory of warmth pressed into stone coldened by centuries. The castle above, majestic and imposing, could not see these subtleties, could not hear the quiet triumphs and failures that defined life beneath its feet. Yet the underworld remembered. There was a rhythm here, a patience born of necessity. Generations of caretakers, of silent witnesses, had moved through these tunnels like the current of a river, leaving traces that spoke of courage, guilt, and longing. And though the world above changed, kings fell, wars raged, banners burned, the underworld remained, a repository of the human experience unclaimed by time. Every whisper of wind through the stone corridors, every faint glimmer of reflected torchlight, carried a story, a fragment of memory preserved in the very bones of the castle. Here, history was tactile. You could feel it beneath your fingertips, smell it in the mingling scents of herb and smoke, hear it in the subtle creaks and groans of the old wood. And it was in this quiet, in this hidden reverence for life's smallest acts, that the essence of the castle was most profoundly revealed. Life was measured not in conquests or feasts, but in the small, courageous gestures that defied forgetting. A prayer whispered in the dead of night, a morsel of bread shared in secrecy, a letter exchanged through a crack in the wall. These were the deeds that endured, etched invisibly into the architecture, into the stones that would outlast kings and courtiers alike. And yet, despite this subterranean existence, the castle above remained vigilant, unaware of the currents flowing beneath its feet. From the battlements, the world seemed orderly, governed by walls and watchtowers, by lords and laws. But below, the pulse of hidden lives persisted, insistent and unwavering. The labyrinthine corridors held a mirror to the human heart, secretive, resilient, capable of tenderness and cruelty in equal measure. Every step through the underworld was a testament to the indelible presence of humanity, even when cloaked in shadow. In the deepest recesses, where the draught carried the scent of damp stone and the faintest memory of smoke, a final chamber waited, a place that seemed to exhale centuries of secrecy. Here, the air was almost alive, charged with the weight of stories that would never leave this space, yet would never be completely forgotten. Light barely touched the walls, and where it did, it revealed inscriptions, carvings, and objects placed with deliberate care. Every element spoke of endurance, of survival, of the quiet defiance of mortality. The castle above, proud and unyielding, had long ceased to notice the world beneath. Yet the underworld remembered, and in remembering, it demanded witness, not of lords, nor of kings, nor of time itself, but of those willing to descend into shadow and listen. For in the twisting corridors, in the scent of herbs, in the rust of chains, and the echo of broken bells, the story of human life endured, fragile, tenacious, and unafraid to linger where the world above would never see it. The castle kept its watch, and the secrets beneath waited patiently, as they always had, for the day they would again be called to witness the light. Fog clung to the ramparts like a shroud, muting the sound of hooves on stone and turning the castle into a silhouette against the pale dawn. The morning air was heavy and still, carrying the chill of nights spent under the weight of centuries. From this distance, the fortress appeared inert, yet beneath its towering walls, life, or what once was life, persisted in shadows and silence. A hidden hatch, long forgotten by those who walked the battlements above, creaked open as if breathing. It revealed a stairway carved from living rock, worn smooth by centuries of hurried feet and whispered secrets. The stone underfoot was slick with condensation, and every step stirred the faint scent of iron, mingled with candle smoke and the lingering essence of damp earth. Here, the castle spoke in whispers, not of kings or knights, but of those who slipped between its walls, moving unseen. Each corridor, each chamber, was a repository of memory, letters sealed in wax, brittle with age, their ink faded but still legible to the careful eye, jars of powdered herbs, remnants of remedies and rituals whose purpose had long been obscured, iron shackles, heavy and cold, which had restrained the bodies of the condemned, their edges scarred with desperate scratches and the residue of sin and guilt. In the dim torchlight, or what passed for light in these passages, every object seemed to pulse with the weight of human experience. Scratched prayers in Latin traced themselves along rough walls, not etched with pride, but with trembling devotion, hope, and sometimes despair. A veil lay draped over a stone ledge, its edges frayed, a mark of mourning left behind by a hand that would never return. A rusted key rested alone on a cold slab of rock, a silent witness to locks opened, doors barred, and secrets kept too long. Each object was a fragment of a life once lived, a story half forgotten, yet insisting upon remembrance. The air here was alive with echoes. A faint draught carried the whispers of voices long silenced. A woman praying for her child, a soldier confessing sins to the dark, a scholar lamenting forbidden knowledge. These whispers mingled with the occasional drip of water from unseen cracks, the distant creak of timbers far above, and the shifting of unseen feet over stone. In corners where the light failed to reach, shadows gathered, forming shapes that seemed almost sentient. They were guardians of memory, protectors of stories that the daylight could never understand. Every footstep, every breath taken here felt like trespassing in a sacred, haunted cathedral of the past. Some objects spoke more loudly than words. Broken bells, their bronze surfaces dulled and cracked, hinted at rituals interrupted or condemned. Tattered banners, once proud in ceremonial halls, now frayed and mottled, whispered of loyalty and defeat, of ceremonies performed to please gods who no longer answered. A fragment of a prayer book, scorched along the edges, suggested clandestine devotion and forbidden knowledge kept from inquisitive eyes. These relics did not merely exist. They demanded attention, offering insight into the rituals and fears of those who had once called this underworld home. Time itself seemed to bend here, slowed to a careful crawl. A heartbeat measured the distance between danger and survival. A breath reminded the intruder that some knowledge was dangerous, meant only for the bold or the desperate. The faint smell of iron, the dampness of stone, the whisper of wind through cracks and loopholes, all worked together to create a tension that wrapped around the soul. Every sense was heightened. A footstep too loud could awaken memories better left dormant. A cough could summon the echoes of judgment past. In this subterranean labyrinth, fear and courage were inseparable. It was impossible to walk these passages without sensing the presence of those who had gone before, some protective, some vengeful, some indifferent. One could almost imagine the hurried steps of a novice, carrying messages or sacred texts, pressed against the walls in trembling silence. One could hear the muffled sobs of a prisoner in a cell never meant to be found, or the careful whispers of a scholar copying forbidden scrolls by candlelight. These echoes shaped the air, their resonance as potent as any sword or shield. Above, the castle appeared serene, asleep beneath the morning fog. It was unaware of the labyrinth beneath, of the lives it had nurtured and contained in fear and secrecy. Yet every stone in the lower chambers vibrated with memory. The heat of torchlight flickering on pale faces, the metallic tang of blood, the whispered oaths of loyalty, betrayal, and survival. It was a place where history was not recorded in books or chronicles, but in the textures and scents of existence itself. The coldness of iron, the softness of worn cloth, the roughness of stone walls shaped by centuries of hands. The deeper one ventured, the more the symbolism of the underworld became apparent. Broken bells marked interruptions of sacred ritual. Tattered banners recalled allegiances that had been questioned or condemned. Scorched prayer books hinted at devotion that had been punished. These remnants were not just objects. They were markers of consequence, warnings left by the past for those who dared to search. To touch them was to confront the lives that had shaped the stone and air, to feel the fear and hope imprinted upon the world in silence. A single candle flickered at the end of a corridor, throwing its light against a wall of stone so blackened by time it seemed to absorb sound itself. Shadows moved with a life of their own, twisting into shapes that hinted at figures who might once have walked these halls. Each step taken toward that light felt like a negotiation with history, an acknowledgement of the weight carried by those who had come before, and an understanding that one's own presence would add another layer to the whispers, another echo to join the chorus of memory. And yet, there was a strange serenity in this subterranean world. For all the fear, for all the echoes of guilt and desperation, there was also survival. Each object, each shadow, each whispered fragment was proof that life endured even under the strictest watch of walls and rulers. A fragment of a prayer left on a stone slab, a jar of herbs tucked into a niche, a rusted key forgotten on a cold floor, all testified that human resilience could endure centuries, quietly, unseen, and unacknowledged by the world above. As the explorer reached the end of the narrow corridor, a final draft carried a faint scent of incense, long extinguished but never fully forgotten. In that moment, the past felt immediate, almost tangible. The walls seemed to exhale with memory. The shadows leaned forward in silent counsel, and the air vibrated with the weight of centuries. It was a reminder that every secret held here had a voice, and every story, however hidden, demanded recognition. Above, the morning fog began to lift. The ramparts caught the first light of dawn, revealing the castle's silhouette in sharper relief. Below, the underworld remained, a labyrinth of memory, fear, and devotion. Some doors would never be opened. Some voices would never be heard. Yet the echoes persisted, waiting for the rare hand daring enough to stir them, for the one willing to walk quietly among shadows, to listen, to remember, and to carry the weight of history forward.